GT Holidays, South India's #1 travel brand.
GUVI, a vernacular edutech brand, skilling everyone everywhere.
Hello, welcome to Galata Plus Reviews. This is the review of Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve. It's a cause for much joy when a filmmaker known for his penchant for science fiction offers visual callbacks to iconic films in the genre in the opening moments of his latest film. Dune Part 2, based on the books by Frank Herbert, picks up from Dune Part 1. It begins with a voiceover eerily similar to that of Linda Hamilton from the Terminator films. And when you see the accompanying image of bodies being burnt, it recalls James Cameron's dystopian nightmare. And when you see the subsequent image of an embryo, it's reminiscent of the final image from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. I started thinking of how death and birth or rebirth become a recurring theme in part 2. Villeneuve alternates these two events inventively at different junctures in this sequel, which boasts more characters and a richer, more majestic scale than its predecessor. There is a supposedly poisonous drink called the water of life that kills and rejuvenates at once. Take Timothee Chalamet's Paul Atreides, a character destined to be the eventual messianic figure known as Kwisatz Haderach. The once vulnerable young boy undergoes a gradual transformation into an authoritative figure looked upon as the one who will lead the good guys to salvation. The same death rebirth process occurs to his mother, Lady Jessica, played by Rebecca Ferguson, who also evolves into a more chilling, commanding force. The drink offers enhancement of visions to someone already blessed with the power of foreseeing future events or reading someone's history merely by looking at them. Recently, film critic Richard Brody tweeted in response to an interview of Villeneuve where he said that he hates dialogue, that the gifted Quebec filmmaker doesn't know how to film them. While disagreeing with Brody that this doesn't apply to all films of Villeneuve, I must point out that it was a glaring shortcoming of Dune Part 1. In Part 1, the characters were whispering their lines most of the time, to a point that got me annoyed and almost put me to sleep. While Part 2 doesn't get saved from the banal, lifeless dialogues whenever it pauses between high octane action, it does a relatively better job of holding our attention. Among its various merits, we get Zendaya's emotionally affecting performance and Javier Bardem's successful deadpan comic timing. Part 2 is also fortunately much more imaginative at staging a giant spectacle. The design of inanimate objects draws evident comparison to insects. The sequel reintroduces us to a few of the machines from Part 1, aside from introducing newer and bigger ones. Suffice it to say that the film is a sci-fi fantasy fan's dream come true. Villeneuve and the extraordinary imagination of cinematographer Greg Fraser once again reinforced the impression of human beings appearing dwarfed in relation to their internal and external environments. In one scene, we see assassins drop dead like flies from a cliff. In another, armies gathering for a massive battle resemble ants, while a shiny, globe-looking spacecraft emanating flames levitates in the distance. Part 2 is Villeneuve channeling his inner Ridley Scott. Like the latter's recent Napoleon, we see Villeneuve delivering by far his biggest epic. The brown, grey, black color palette of the film may get tiresome for some, but you can only do so much in the desert. Villeneuve, Fraser, production designer Patrice Vermette, and visual effects artist Paul Lambert paint in broad strokes with limited colors. The result is minimalist yet staggering. Take a gladiatorial match which showcases the slithery, ghostly menace of the film's scene-stealing villain, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, played by Austin Butler. The entire sequence is a black and white dream, unlike anything I've seen before. Its immensity and grandeur matched by anything in films like Tron Legacy or The Tragedy of Macbeth. I must bring up Terminator and 2001 again because looking at the Dune films in their entirety, you see Villeneuve trying to merge the sensibilities of the Cameron and the Kubrick films. It's not always a harmonious combination. Part 1, which seemed like an action epic made by Terrence Malick, had a soporific quality that worked against it in some places. Such moments are, thankfully, fewer in Part 2. The other strange aspect working against Part 2, and this is no fault of Villeneuve, is the strong sense of deja vu it evokes. We saw the story of the chosen one who may or may not get seduced by the dark path, prophecies or the fear in one's power, which were explored better in other sci-fi fantasy epics, such as the Matrix trilogy or the George Lucas director Star Wars? Or what about the outsider trying to be one of a rebel group, as in Lawrence of Arabia? Or what about the hero trying to tame a giant creature, which later becomes a mode of transport for the characters? That reminds us, of course, of Avatar, which draws heavily from Herbert's books. Villeneuve's Mammoth Challenge involves making us aware of the intricacies and minutiae of Dune's immense world building and focusing on its characters simultaneously. It's an undertaking that Villeneuve pulls off wonderfully, even if not entirely satisfactory. Some motivations remain unclear. The drastic plot development in a couple of instances might find a better explanation in the books. Part 2 ends with a hint at a holy war likely to be explored in Part 3, which I can't wait to see. So that's the review of Dune Part 2. See you all next time.
GT Holidays, South India's #1 travel brand.
GUVI, a vernacular edutech brand, skilling everyone everywhere.